He carries 2 swords into every dark place he enters. One is silver, for the things that should not exist. One is steel, for the things that should. Warhammer 40,000 is a universe that has spent 10,000 years blurring that line into nothing. Here, the things that should not exist have built cathedrals and empires, and the things that should have learned to worship them out of necessity. What does a witcher do when he can no longer tell which sword to draw? The amber lights of Vashrakel's transit hub never dimmed. This was by design. Pauvre Shani Elan, watercast liaison for the Labor Cooperative Accord of the Amber Threshold's 3rd human colony, had worked the hub's processing terminals for 19 years, and in that time she had come to understand the amber glow of the ceiling-mounted lumen spheres as the physical manifestation of the greater good's promise, constant, warm, attentive. The Tau did not believe in darkness as metaphor or shadow as comfort. Light was efficiency. Light was productivity measured and achieved. She was filing labor transfer permits at 0340 on a standard cycle when the distortion happened. There was no explosion, no cascading system failure, no wailing klaxon announcing a hull breach or containment event. There was only a sound she would describe for the rest of her long life as the noise of something being wrong with the air, a deep resonant wrongness, like a string on an instrument pulled past its breaking point and stretched across 3 seconds of time instead of snapping. The amber lights did not flicker. The terminal screens continued scrolling productivity data. But in the center of the transit hub's lower access corridor, reality folded in on itself like a page being turned, and through the crease where the fold met its own edge, something stepped out. Shani Alan did not scream. She was, by professional temperament and 19 years of watercast training, the kind of person who assessed before reacting. She assessed. The figure that had stepped through the distortion was bipedal, human-shaped but wrong in the proportions of its frame, more compact than a human should be without being small, built from compressed tension rather than bulk. It wore leather and chainmail in configurations the toy equipment catalogs had no category for. Its hair was white and pulled back. Its eyes, catching the amber light, were vertical slitted gold. It held a sword already drawn. Then the Firecast squad that monitored the transit hub arrived at a run, pulse rifles leveled, and the question of whether Shani Alan would scream became irrelevant. Vashrakel had been the amber threshold for 112 years, which was exactly how long the Tau's watercast had spent turning what the Imperium's abandoned survey logs called a resource-rich but strategically marginal industrial world into something the greater good could use. 3 human colonies, inherited from a brief imperial presence that had withdrawn its garrison during a border realignment 3 centuries prior, had been brought into the cooperative fold through careful negotiation, sustained resource investment, and the patient demonstration that the Tau's administration provided a standard of living the Imperium had never offered. The mines ran deep and produced well. The processing plants converted ore to refined material at rates that satisfied the Ethereal Oversight Commission's quarterly assessments. The human population worked, ate, reproduced, and by the measured standards of cooperative prosperity, thrived. Chassel Kalian Ossian had commanded the garrison for 7 years and had never fired on a human. He was not sentimental about this. Sentiment was not a command tool. He had not fired on a human because the humans of Vashrakel had not given him cause to fire, and an undetonated weapon was simply a more useful weapon. Ossian understood utility the way others understood scripture. Everything was a resource. Everything could be allocated, optimized, deployed, including an anomalous bipedal entity that appeared without a vessel record or transit clearance from a localized distortion event in Hub Transit Level 7. He received the report at 0341. He issued his orders at 0342. Detain the entity. Do not damage it unless damage becomes necessary. Document everything. Notify him when it was secured. He arrived at the detention level at 0354 to find the entity sitting on the floor of the containment cell, with its back against the wall and its legs extended in front of it, the silver sword laid horizontally across its thighs, and the expression on its face being the particular expression of someone who has been detained before and has learned that patience is cheaper than violence in the early stages. Ossian stood on the other side of the clear containment barrier and studied it. It studied him back. The first word it said, in a language the auto-translators had never processed, but which the Watercast's broader linguistic databases eventually identified as a variant of a dead Proto-Terran tongue, was contract. The translators took 4 hours. Ossian was patient because patience was a tactical virtue, and because the entity had not attempted to escape, had not threatened the guards, and had eaten the nutritional ration block the guards offered without visible objection. These were, in Ossian's assessment, good indicators. The entity's name, as best the translators could render it, was Geralt of Rivia. It was, it said, a witcher. Ossian asked what a witcher was. The entity considered this for longer than the question seemed to warrant. Something between a soldier and a specialist, it said finally. Trained to kill things that shouldn't exist. And what should not exist, where you come from. Monsters, Geralt said. Then, after a pause, he looked at the Tau garrison commander through the containment barrier with those golden slitted eyes and added, "The definition gets complicated." Ossian had spent 7 years as garrison commander and 12 before that as a line officer. He had met, over those 19 years, perhaps 200 humans. He had found them, as a category, variable in the qualities he valued most: accuracy of observation, economy of speech, willingness to subordinate individual priority to collective necessity. Most humans were not accurate. Most humans were not economical. Most humans prioritized themselves. The Witcher was accurate. The Witcher was very economical. By the second hour of the interview, which Ossian had come to think of less as an interrogation and more as a mutual evaluation, he had established the following. The entity had arrived without intending to, through a mechanism that operated outside any technology the TOS Science Cast had logged. It had no obvious means of return. It was not hostile, or at least it had chosen not to be hostile thus far, which in Ossian's experience was the only useful measure of the distinction. It was carrying 2 swords, the silver one and a steel one still in its scabbard, and had requested their return with the same flat calm it applied to everything else. And in the 4th hour, when the Watercast administrator Pauvre Shani Elan submitted her observation addendum, something in the interview shifted. Shani Elan's addendum was clinical and precise, which Ossian expected. What he had not expected was her footnote. The footnote stated that in the moments following the entity's appearance and before the Firecast squad's arrival, she had observed the entity pausing in the middle of the access corridor, sword raised, turning its head 45 degrees to the east wall, and inhaling twice, in a manner that suggested controlled, deliberate sensory engagement rather than disorientation. Ossian put the addendum down and looked at the Witcher. "When you came through the corridor," he said, "you stopped. You smelled something." The Witcher did not confirm or deny for 3 seconds. "There's a smell in this facility," it said, "coming from below. Something is wrong with the air in your sub-levels. Our environmental monitors show no contamination events. Your environmental monitors are measuring the wrong things." Ossian had, for the past 3 months, been filing internal reports with the Ethereal Oversight Commission, noting a 17% decline in labor productivity across the deep ore processing districts of the second human colony. The Commission had responded with efficiency optimization mandates and a recommendation for motivational Watercast outreach programs. Ossian had implemented the mandates and the outreach programs. The decline had continued. 43 workers across the processing districts had been logged as absent without account in the past 18 months. The Watercast had classified these as voluntary departures, undocumented transit, or accidents in the lower ore corridors where conditions were difficult to monitor. The Ethereal Oversight Commission had accepted these classifications. Ossian had not entirely accepted them. He looked at the Witcher for a long moment. "If I returned your swords," he said, "and gave you access to the lower districts, what would you do?" "Find what's taking your workers," Geralt said. "And if I could offer something in exchange for that service, I'd want passage back to wherever I came from," Geralt said, "or something close to it. We don't yet know where you came from. Then I'd want an honest accounting of whether you're trying. Ossian considered this. He had spent his career evaluating the honesty of offers and demands. The Witcher was not, in his assessment, lying. More than that, the Witcher was not performing. There was no attempt to appear more or less than what it was. Ossian found this, in a human, unusual enough to be valuable. Agreed, he said. The swords were returned at 0834. By 0900, the Witcher was standing in the lower access corridor of the Second Colony's processing district, with his eyes half closed and his head tilted at the same angle Shani Elan had documented. He took 4 steps east, stopped, and said one word: Nest. The processing districts of the Second Colony were built vertically, in the Tau manner, with the cleanest and most efficient operations closest to the orbital tethers, and the rawer, heavier work pushed down toward the planet's interior, where the ore came up by rail lift from the deep mines. The lowest levels had the highest accident rates and the most manual labor. They also had the lowest Tau supervisory presence, because the environments were difficult to outfit for Tau physiology, and the human workers had, over 60 years of practice, developed their own informal management hierarchies that produced acceptable output numbers without requiring direct administrative oversight. Ossian had assigned Shani Elan to accompany the Witcher. She had accepted this assignment with the same professional neutrality she applied to all assignments, which was to say she had spent the transit to the lower districts quietly reviewing the Watercast's emergency communication protocols. Geralt did not seem to mind her. He moved through the processing district's lower corridors the way she had seen Firecast scouts move, close to walls, not rushing, cataloging. But the Firecast scouts catalogued with their equipment. The Witcher catalogued with his body, with the cant of his head and the occasional pause to crouch and press 2 fingers to the ferrocrete floor and lift them to his nose. His eyes did not stop moving. His hand rested on the hilt of the steel sword at his left hip in a manner that was not casual. "How long have the workers been disappearing?" he asked. "The commission logs show 43 unaccounted departures in 18 months, Shani Elan said. "The commission logs," Geralt repeated, in a tone that made it clear he understood what that meant. "The real number," she said, after a pause that surprised her even as she took it, "is closer to 70. Some were logged as voluntary, some as accident casualties in the deep corridors, a few as transfer departures we have no destination records for." The Witcher nodded, as though this confirmed something he had already worked out. "How deep does this district go?" "The transit maps show 12 subsurface levels. The rail lifts service the first 9. 3 and 4 are partially sealed due to a structural assessment that was flagged but not yet completed." "When was it flagged?" 14 months ago." Geralt stopped walking. He turned and looked at her with those golden eyes. Nobody ever went back to complete it. It was not a question. Shani Elan found she could not immediately provide a counter-argument that satisfied her own standards of honesty. The Commission prioritized productivity maintenance over structural assessment. The flagged levels were producing acceptable tonnage from the adjacent corridors. "Something made sure they were," Geralt said. He found the first sign 40 meters further along, at a junction where the main corridor branched into a sealed access passage. The seal was Tau standard issue, bonded polymer over a maglock rated for industrial environments. The seal had not been broken, but at the base of the wall beside it, where the ferrocrete met the floor in a seam that had been there for 60 years, something had been carved. Shani Elan had to crouch to see it. It was small and precise, a symbol she did not recognize, repeated in a line along the seam like writing. "What is that?" she asked. "A marker," Geralt said. "Something left it for others of its kind. It says this passage is safe." He straightened. "For them." The second sign was 20 meters further, identical, at the foot of a ventilation access shaft that should have been too narrow for a human body. The third was at the service entrance to a maintenance corridor that the facility schematics showed as decommissioned. The maintenance corridor did not smell like a decommissioned corridor. Geralt did not go in. He marked the entrance location in the verbal log Ossian had asked him to maintain, stepped back, and spent 3 minutes studying the surrounding floor in the pale glow of the lumen strips that remained active even in the decommissioned section. "There's traffic here," he said. "Regular, light-footed, more than one type. Workers, some of them." He paused. "Some of them are not the same kind of thing they used to be." Shani Elan processed this for a moment. She had spent 19 years managing human labor populations. She thought she understood what humans were. The Witcher was suggesting something about the workers that the Water Caste's administrative language did not have a category for, and she noticed, with professional precision, that the suggestion made the air feel different to her. "Not the same kind of thing they used to be," she repeated. "What does that mean?" "It means something has been changing them," Geralt said. "Over time, slowly. They still look human, but they smell differently. They think differently. Their loyalty has been reorganized." He looked at the decommissioned corridor entrance. "And whatever reorganized it is down there," he reported to Ossian at 1430. He used clean, direct language. He described what he had found, what he believed it meant, and what he needed to proceed. Ossian listened without interrupting, which Shani Elan noted was unusual. She had sat in many briefings with the garrison commander and had learned that he interrupted early and often as a calibration tool to see where a speaker placed their emphasis and how they responded to redirection. He did not interrupt the Witcher. When Geralt finished, Ossian said, "You're describing an infiltration." "Deeper than that," Geralt said. "I'm describing a colony inside your colony, something that's been there for at least a generation, maybe longer." "How do you know how long?" "The markers are old, the roots are worn. Whatever changed those workers, it had time to change their children too." He looked at the garrison commander across the hollow display table. "You're not looking for missing workers anymore. You're looking for something that's been building in your foundation while your productivity numbers looked acceptable." Ossian was quiet for 4 seconds. Shani Elan counted. "What do you need?" he said. "To go deeper," Geralt said. "Alone." He went alone because he had always gone alone into the dark places, and because the fire-cast soldiers Ossian had offered would make the noise of an army and announce him to whatever waited below, and because 43 officially missing workers and 70 actually missing workers could not be recovered by caution. The Witcher descended through the maintenance corridor's access shaft, not as a soldier descending into enemy territory, but as a professional moving into a work environment, methodical, attentive, preserving energy. He had borrowed a handheld luminator from the Tau stores and kept it at the lowest setting that permitted clear vision, barely a glow, enough to make the tunnel walls read as pale gray instead of invisible black. The shaft dropped for 30 meters before it opened. The open space was not on any schematic. It was large. Geralt held the luminator out and swept it across the ceiling and walls and understood, in the way you understood something in your chest before your mind had finished processing it, that he was looking at a space that had been dug over decades by human hands and shaped over the same period into something that was no longer merely underground. There were walls, proper walls, not shored tunnel but shaped ferrocrete, dressed with materials salvaged from the processing levels above. There were objects arranged with intent along those walls, stacked ore canisters serving as furniture, lengths of cable organized into something that might, charitably, be called decor. There was, at the far end, what had been made into an altar. He went to the altar. It was not dedicated to the Tau's ethereal hierarchy, or to any imperial saint, or to any god whose name he recognized from the accumulated theological learning he had gathered across a lifetime of traveling through human nations that organized themselves around belief. It was a circular arrangement of items on a flat stone, smooth gray eggs arranged in a ring, each the size of a fist, and in the center of the ring a carved representation of something that was and was not a human face. The face had 4 arms and too many eyes, and the proportions of a creature that had decided on humanity as an aesthetic choice rather than an inheritance. Geralt studied it for 30 seconds. He did not touch it. The smell was strongest here. Not unpleasant by human standards, but alien in a way that moved through his enhanced senses as a category of wrongness rather than a category of threat. It was biological and deeply patient. It was the smell of something that had been waiting for a very long time. He heard them before he saw them. The sound was not footsteps. It was closer to the collective respiration of a large group of organisms in a shared space, a rhythm, almost synchronized, the way a congregation breathes when it has been still together for a long time. It came from behind a wall of salvaged sheeting on the far side of the space. Geralt put the luminator in his belt, drew his steel sword, and went through the gap. The congregation was there. They were seated on the floor in rows, perhaps 60 of them, in the posture of people who had been sitting that way for hours, and had learned to find stillness comfortable. Most of them looked human. The proportions were slightly wrong in ways that required looking at them specifically and not in aggregate to detect. The extra joint in the fingers, visible only when a hand moved. The eyes that caught light fractionally too late and released it fractionally too early. The stillness that was not the stillness of meditation, but of bodies that had begun to need less oxygen than design intended. At the front of the congregation, facing away from the door Geralt had entered through, was something that was not mostly human. It was seated in a high-backed chair that had been constructed for its shape and not adapted from something else, which meant someone had built it with knowledge of what the occupant would require. It was tall, its arms were 4, the lower 2 folded in its lap, the upper 2 resting on the chair's armrests in a gesture of an authority so comfortable with itself it did not need to perform. Its head, when it turned to look at the Witcher with the unhurried movement of something that had already known he was there, was enclosed in a massive elongated cranium that ended in a jaw still recognizably human, and eyes, 6 of them, set in pairs, that were violet and luminous and ancient. The congregation did not turn, their heads did not move. The creature spoke in a voice like a memory of human speech played through a mechanism that had forgotten some of the original parameters. "You are not from here," it said. "No," Geralt said. "You do not smell of the greater good or of the false emperor's servants." It studied him with those 6 violet eyes. "You smell of something else, something older." "I've been told that before," Geralt said. His sword was still drawn. He held it point down, not at rest, but not raised either. In his experience, the first 30 seconds of a conversation with an unknown intelligence were worth more than the next 30 minutes of combat, and whatever was looking at him from that carved chair was an unknown intelligence. "You came to find what has been taking the ones from above," the creature said. "The blue-skinned administrators." "Workers," Geralt said. "They're workers, the ones who went missing. They did not go missing." The creature's voice carried no defensiveness. It stated this as a fact of geology, something that simply was. They came home. Geralt looked at the congregation around him, the rows of bodies in their shared stillness, the hands folded, the breath synchronized. They were not performing peace. They were not afraid of him. They were, in the most fundamental and unnerving way, exactly where they wanted to be. "How long have you been here?" he asked. "I have been here since before the Blueskins came," the creature said. "My children have been here since their grandparents' were taken into the fold." It lowered its upper arms from the chair's rests and folded them across its chest, crossing all 4 in a gesture that Geralt's body read as ancient, even if his mind could not name why. "I was seeded here by the fleet. Long ago. The fleet's signal stopped coming. I waited. I continued the work because the work was all I knew. And in the waiting, I built what you see." Geralt was quiet for a moment. "The fleet," he said. "Your fleet. It's coming." The 6 violet eyes did not blink. "Yes," the creature said, "at last." "And when it arrives," Geralt said, "what happens to the people up above? To the ones who haven't been changed?" The creature looked at him with the calm of something that had already processed this question 1,000 times and arrived at the same answer 1,000 times. "They are harvested," it said. "As all things are harvested, this is the purpose of the great devourer. This is the end of all waiting." Geralt looked at the congregation, at the rows of people who had been changed into something between 2 natures, neither fully what they were born as, nor fully what they had been made into. He thought about what it meant to stand between a monster and the thing the monster was going to consume. He had thought about this before, many times, on many roads, beside many fires in many countries. He sheathed the sword. "I'm going to need to think," he said. He came back up through the shaft at 2200 and found Ossian waiting at the maintenance corridor entrance with Shani Alan and 2 fire-cast soldiers standing at parade rest behind him. The garrison commander looked at the Witcher for a long moment and then said, "You went in without contacting us." "Yes. The protocol we agreed to included contact at 4-hour intervals. I was in conversation." Ossian's eyes narrowed in an expression Geralt had come to associate with the Tau equivalent of profound skepticism. "With what?" Geralt told him. He told him cleanly and without embellishment, starting with the excavated space and the altar, and ending with the patriarch, the congregation, and the conversation that had included the word harvested. He told him about the fleet signal and the 60 years of waiting. He told him about the workers who had been brought into the fold, and the children who had been born into it, and the grandchildren who had known nothing else. Shani Alan listened with the still, careful expression of someone who was actively revising their understanding of everything they had spent 19 years assuming. Ossian listened with his hands clasped behind his back, and his face locked into command neutral, which Geralt had learned meant the garrison commander was processing something that exceeded his standard categories. When Geralt finished, Ossian said, "A gene stealer cult. You know what it is? Our science-cast archives contain records from cross-species intelligence sharing with the Imperium's Ordo Xenos, historical documents only. The information is not widely circulated." Ossian unclasped his hands and turned to the displays mounted on the corridor wall. Gene stealer cults are precursors. They infect populations, change them biologically and psychically, and grow until the hive fleet arrives, at which point the cult's purpose is fulfilled. "The fleet arrives," Geralt said, "and everything the cult built gets eaten with everything else." "Correct." Ossian pulled up the deep sector scan data that the science cast had flagged 3 days prior as a possible debris field event. He zoomed the scan to its maximum resolution and showed it to the Witcher. The contact was not a debris field. Debris fields did not move with coordinated mass directional change. Debris fields did not heat to the specific thermal signature of living biological processes operating at void scale. Debris fields did not resolve, at maximum resolution, into the silhouette of what appeared to be an approaching biomass whose outer edge exceeded the optical range of the scan array. "It's already here," Geralt said. "At current speed, it reaches Vashra Kel in 11 days. How many people are on this planet?" "Approximately 900,000, human and Tau combined." Geralt stood in front of the scan display for a long time. "What does the Greater Good say to do?" he said. "The Greater Good's emergency protocol for a hive fleet contact calls for immediate orbital evacuation of non-essential personnel, notification of the Tuveo Sept Council for fleet support, and defensive preparation of the planet's strategic installations." Ossian paused. "The protocol was written assuming a hive fleet approaching an uninflected planet. It does not account for an inflected population." "Because you can't tell," Geralt said. "You can't tell who's been changed and who hasn't." "Correct." Ossian looked at the Witcher. "The congregation you found below. How many?" 60 in that chamber. Could be more in the deeper levels. Could be many more." Geralt paused. "The ones who've been changed but are still mostly human, still working their shifts, still filing productivity reports. They could be hundreds, maybe more." "And the Patriarch," Ossian said. "Is it approachable? Will it negotiate?" "It doesn't think it needs to," Geralt said. "It's been waiting 60 years for that fleet. It thinks the fleet is salvation." He looked at Ossian. "But it's wrong about that." "Explain." "The fleet eats everything. The cult is a preparation tool. When the fleet arrives, the cult members don't survive the harvest any more than the people who weren't changed." He had gathered this not from the Patriarch directly, but from the architecture of what the Patriarch had said, and the theology that framed it, the reverent certainty in that voice when it said all things are harvested. The Patriarch believes the fleet is coming to receive them, to take them into the Great Whole. It doesn't understand that the Great Whole isn't a family reunion, it's digestion. Shani Alan spoke for the first time since the briefing began. "Does it matter," she said, "whether the Patriarch understands?" Both the garrison commander and the Witcher looked at her. "Whether it believes the fleet will welcome them or consume them," she said, carefully, "the fleet will consume them either way. The question of whether we tell the Patriarch the truth about what is coming is a question of whether we tell a congregation of people who have been born into a belief system that their God is a predator." She paused. "And then we decide what to do with that." Geralt looked at her for a long moment. "You're right," he said. "That's exactly the question." Ossian gave him 24 hours to plan and 6 hours to sleep, which the Witcher accepted because he was, whatever else he was, a professional, and professionals slept when they could, before entering a situation where sleeping would no longer be possible. At 0600, Geralt descended again, this time with the steel sword on his hip and the silver sword drawn. The Patriarch was waiting for him in the same chair. The congregation was not present. The chamber held only the two of them. "You came back," the Patriarch said. "I told you I needed to think." "And what did thinking produce?" Geralt crossed the chamber and sat on the floor across from the high-backed chair, which was not the posture of someone ready to fight and was not intended to be. He put the silver sword across his knees. "You know what this is," he said, indicating the blade. "Silver, silver sword. Where I come from, silver is for monsters. And yet you sit," the Patriarch said. "I need you to understand something before I decide what to do," Geralt said. "The fleet that's coming, you believe it's coming to receive you. To complete the great cycle," the Patriarch said. "To gather the children of the Starborn into, to eat you," Geralt said. The 6 violet eyes regarded him without expression. "The fleet doesn't differentiate," Geralt said. "Cult members, uninflected humans, Tau administrators, structures and soils and atmospheres. Everything that's standing on this planet when that fleet arrives gets processed. Your congregation, the grandchildren, the children born into the fold who've never known anything else." He looked at the Patriarch steadily. "I've heard what you've built here. I've seen it. 60 years of cultivation. People who found a different way to be what they are. And when that fleet comes, all of it ends the same way everything else on this planet ends, consumed." The Patriarch was silent for a long time. "You are attempting," it said finally, "to alter my theological convictions with pragmatic argument." "I'm attempting to tell you a true thing," Geralt said, "because you deserve to know it before I'm forced to act." "Forced to act? 900,000 people on this planet will die when that fleet arrives, if nothing changes. Your congregation is part of that number." He paused. "The garrison commander above has 11 days and a communication array and a Taranwo fleet in the Sept. If we can clear this planet's population before the fleet makes contact, some of those 900,000 people survive, maybe most. And my children," the Patriarch said, "the changed ones." "I don't know," Geralt said. "That's the honest answer. I don't know what happens to your congregation if the Tau evacuate this planet. I don't know if the Tau would let them evacuate. I don't know if the Tau could safely transport people who are biologically altered, in ways the Tau can't currently quantify." He looked at the four-armed figure in its chair. "I know what happens if the fleet arrives and nothing has changed. Every single one of them dies." The Patriarch looked at its own lower hands, folded in its lap. It was a gesture Geralt had seen in humans when they were considering something that required them to look at what they held, rather than what confronted them. "You could have come down here with weapons," it said, "with the blue-skinned soldiers. You chose to come and speak." "Burning the nest is easy," Geralt said. "I've burned nests. I know how it goes. You don't need a Witcher for that." He looked at the Patriarch. "I don't know what you are. I don't know what you call what you've built here. But I've seen cults and I've seen congregations and I've seen monsters, and you're not reading to me as straightforwardly as any of those." He paused. "I've learned to be careful when things don't read straightforwardly." The Patriarch looked at him for a long time with all 6 of its eyes. "If I told my children to surface," it said, "if I walked them out of the deep places into the light above, where your blue-skinned commander waits with his soldiers." "I can't promise what happens next," Geralt said. "I can promise I'll argue for their lives. I can promise the commander above is a man who values utility over ideology, and your congregation knows these tunnels and this planet better than any survey ever has, and that information has value. I can promise that dying here when the fleet arrives is the guaranteed option, and the alternative is at minimum uncertain. Witchers, the Patriarch said, in that voice like remembered human speech. Where you come from, what are they for? To protect people from monsters, Geralt said, and from themselves? Geralt considered this. That's what it ends up being, usually, he said. The Patriarch unfolded all four of its arms and placed its hands flat on the armrests of its chair. It was a gesture of decision. Geralt read it as clearly as a drawn weapon. Give me until morning, the Patriarch said. I will walk my children out. The congregation came up through the maintenance corridor, in the grey hour before dawn, the Patriarch leading with the same carved patience it had worn in its chair below, the congregation in a column behind it, the changed workers, and the hybrid-born, and the children who were all some gradient of both. Ossian had his garrison deployed in a cordon, 40 fire-cast soldiers in pulse rifles, 2 crisis suits on the flanks, every weapon aimed at what came through the corridor door. Shani Elan stood at Ossian's left shoulder with the expression of someone who understood exactly what they were witnessing and had not yet decided what to feel about it. Geralt came up first. He emerged from the corridor and stepped to the side, and the Patriarch came through behind him, tall and four-armed and violet-eyed, and behind the Patriarch came the congregation, one by one, blinking in the amber light of the transit hub. The fire-cast soldiers did not fire. Ossian had ordered them not to fire unless fired upon, and the congregation was not firing. The congregation was standing with its hands visible in a posture of careful, deliberate non-threat, which was a posture that not all of them were shaped to achieve without awkwardness, given the variations in their limb configurations, but they were achieving it. Ossian walked forward until he was standing 10 meters from the Patriarch. He looked at the creature for a long time. The creature looked back. You built a colony inside my colony, Ossian said. Yes, the Patriarch said, for 60 years. Yes, and your people have been modifying my workers without their initial consent. The modification was given as a gift, the Patriarch said. In the beginning. After the beginning, it was received as an inheritance. It paused. This is true of most belief systems. Ossian turned to look at Shani Elan. She had nothing to say. He turned back to the Patriarch. The Witcher tells me you have knowledge of the tunnel systems beneath this planet that our surveys have never reached, Ossian said. We have mapped every tunnel, every seam, every stress fracture and drainage route, and deep shaft that the original human settlers opened and abandoned before my arrival. The Patriarch's voice was steady. We know this world in ways that no surface administrator has ever needed to know it. That information has strategic value for an evacuation. It does, and you are offering it. The Witcher explained the arithmetic, the Patriarch said. I understand arithmetic. Ossian clasped his hands behind his back. He turned to the senior fire-cast lieutenant at his right. Detain. Do not harm. Full medical scan on each individual. Document everything. Begin immediately. He turned back to the congregation still filing out of the corridor. Watercast. Begin population notification protocols. Full discretion classification until I clear it otherwise. He turned to the Witcher. The fleet. 11 days. 10 now, Geralt said. Can you fight it? Geralt looked at the garrison commander steadily. Can you? Ossian turned to the scan display that had been mounted on the hub wall overnight and pulled up the updated contact data. The contact had resolved further since yesterday. It was no longer possibly a debris field. It was definitively a biological mass of void scale, and the closer it got to sensor range, the larger it read. I have sent for Sept Fleet support, Ossian said. Earliest estimated arrival is 14 days. 3 days after the fleet makes contact with the planet, Geralt said. Yes. Geralt was quiet for a moment. What's the evacuation capacity of your orbital tethers? Full planetary evacuation would require 96 standard hours under optimal loading conditions. So you have 10 days to load 900,000 people onto whatever ships you have and get them clear. Not exactly. We also have the congregation. Ossian looked at the still-forming line of changed workers and hybrid-born and children. Their cooperation speeds the evacuation. Their presence complicates it. How? Because if I report this accurately to the Ethereal Oversight Commission, Ossian said, the Commission's protocol requires containment and assessment of infected populations before any integration with uninfected populations. Containment and assessment take longer than 10 days. And if you don't report it accurately, Ossian was quiet for 3 seconds. Then I make a command decision, under conditions of emergency, that I document after the fact. You can do that. I have never done it. Ossian looked at the Witcher. I am considering doing it now. Geralt studied the garrison commander. The precise posture, the hands behind the back, the face held at command neutral while something behind it worked through mathematics that were no longer purely mathematical. He recognized the face of a person discovering the place where their system ended and their judgment began. It's a harder line to walk than it looks, Geralt said, once you're over it. I imagine it is, Ossian said. He turned back to the displays. Begin evacuation sequencing, non-essential personnel first. All available tethers. I want loading estimates within the hour. 7 days. That was what it took, in the end. Not the 10 that arithmetic suggested, and not the 14 that the Commission's protocol assumed, but 7 days of continuous loading, 18-hour shift cycles, the congregation's knowledge of the tunnel network, opening routes to population centers, the Tau's surface maps had marked as low density, but which turned out, when the tunnels were mapped, to contain the undocumented communities that the processing district had grown around its formal boundaries over 60 years of imperfect administrative oversight. Shani Elan ran the watercast coordination. She had not slept more than 4 hours in any given rotation. She had also, somewhere in the second day, stopped writing her field reports in the clinical register she had been trained to use, and started writing them in the voice of someone who was witnessing something that her training had not prepared her for, which she recognized as a professional failing and was temporarily unable to care about. Ossian ran the military sequencing. He had also, on the second day, submitted a communication to the Ethereal Oversight Commission, informing them that Vashrakel was undergoing a precautionary evacuation in response to a significant void-based biological threat and requesting emergency Sept fleet deployment. He did not mention the congregation. He did not mention the Patriarch, who was currently housed in a secure monitoring suite 4 levels above the transit hub, cooperating with every science cast survey team that came to document its biology with the patience of something that had spent 60 years being patient and had decided patience was still the correct tool. The Witcher helped with what he could help with. He was not a logistician, he was not a fleet commander or an evacuation planner or a population administrator. What he was, in those 7 days, was a figure who moved through the corridors of a planet, being carefully emptied, and noticed the things that the Tau systems, efficient and comprehensive as they were, did not notice. The family that had barricaded itself into a processing-level subchamber because they had heard a rumor that the Blueskins were removing people for punishment. The worker in the ore corridor who was not loading onto the transport because he had not told anyone that his sister was one of the 60 he had seen in the congregation below, and he did not know if she was being allowed on the ships. The maintenance worker on level 9 who was, in the last hour before her transport departed, still trying to find her daughter, who was hybrid-born and had been terrified to surface and had hidden instead of walking out with the congregation. Geralt found the daughter. He found her in the maintenance corridor, curled behind a conduit housing, with the extra fingers on both hands pulled under her arms, and her face pointed at the wall, and he sat down next to her and said nothing for 3 minutes and then said, quietly, "Your mother is looking for you." The girl, who was perhaps 12 in standard years and had spent her life in the amber light of the Undercity, looked at him with the faintly wrong eyes that catalogued him in a way that standard human eyes did not. "The soldiers will see what I am," she said. "Some of them," Geralt said. "Some of them are seeing a lot of things right now they were not trained to see. Most of them are focused on loading people onto ships." "Are we people?" she asked. Geralt was quiet for a moment. "That's a question I've watched humans spend centuries arguing about," he said. "Usually they're arguing about people who are obviously people. In my experience, The ones who need to answer it most never actually settle it. They just stop asking long enough to do something decent or something terrible, and then they start asking again. The girl looked at him. "Your mother is looking for you," Geralt said again. "Come on." He walked her to the loading platform, and watched her find her mother, and watched the mother hold her daughter against her chest, in the particular grip of someone who has spent hours wondering if they would get to do that again. A fire-caste soldier noticed the girl's extra fingers and hesitated, and Geralt stepped into the hesitation and said something to the soldier in the limited Tau he had acquired over 7 days of working alongside them, which amounted to, "This one is with me," which was not technically accurate, but was sufficiently confident that the soldier moved on. They made the transport. They got off the planet. On the 7th day, Geralt watched the last of the orbit-bound transports burn up into the grey-yellow sky of Vashrakel. 917,000 people, processed through the tethers and the platforms, and loaded onto a fleet of ships that had never been meant to move this much population this quickly, and had been managed to do it anyway by a garrison commander who had made one command decision on his own authority and built everything else out of it. The Patriarch was on one of the last ships. Ossian had made no decision about what happened to the congregation's future beyond the immediate survival of its members, because there were no commission protocols that covered it, and he was not, as he said to Shani Alan in the final hour, going to improvise further than the situation required him to. What happened to them afterward was a question for the Sept Council and for people with more authority than a garrison commander. What he could say was that they were alive when they left. That was, in the arithmetic of these 11 days, already more than the alternative. Geralt stood on the planetary surface in the final hour and watched the sky. The fleet was close enough now to be visible without equipment. It was visible as a darkening of the far horizon stars, a shadow moving against the fixed light of space, the wrong kind of shadow, the organic kind, the living, smothering kind. He watched it the way he had watched the approach of threats all his life, with the professional attention of someone assessing scale and distance, and the question of whether what approached was something he could fight. He already knew the answer. He had known it since the scan display in the transit hub. There were things in the world, in any world, that were not in the category of things a witcher could kill with a silver sword or a steel one. This was one of them. Ossian's voice came from the comm device at Geralt's belt. "The last transport has cleared the tether. It's time." Geralt turned from the darkening horizon and walked to the final shuttle. The fleet made contact with Vashrakel on the 8th day. From the science-cast observation deck of Ossian's command vessel, it looked like the planet being eaten, not metaphorically. Literally consumed, the outer atmosphere drawn into the biological mass of the fleet's tendril like a tide reversed. The surface features of the amber threshold obscured in the first hour by the feeding biomass, and after the second hour not visible at all. Shani Elan watched for 30 minutes, and then went to file a report. Her report did not state what she had witnessed. It stated operational metrics, population transferred, tether cycles completed, asset loss ratio, projected resettlement timeline. She would write what she had witnessed later, in the personal log she had started on the 2nd day, in the voice that was not Watercast official register. She would write it in that voice because it was the only one that felt honest for what the words needed to carry. The Sept fleet arrived on the 12th day, 3 days after the planet was gone. Ossian submitted his full operational report. He had spent the 3 days between planetary evacuation and fleet arrival, preparing it with the careful precision he gave all his work, which meant the report was accurate, complete, and presented in a sequence that demonstrated sound command judgment at every decision point. The decision not to report the inflected population in the initial commission contact was present in the report. It was documented as a command judgment call under emergency conditions with the reasoning fully stated. He did not minimize it. The fleet admiral who received the report read it twice, and then summoned Ossian to a formal review. The formal review was still ongoing when the Ethereal Oversight Commission sent its own team to interview the congregation. The congregation was housed in a converted cargo bay on one of the larger transports, 311 individuals at various points on the spectrum of biological integration. The Patriarch had its own compartment. It spent most of its time in conversation with the science cast researchers, who were trying to document what they were looking at, with the specific mixture of clinical fascination and suppressed disquiet that characterized expert engagement with something outside one's expert category. The Witcher was in a compartment on the same transport that Ossian had allocated to him, a small and utilitarian space, and he spent the days of waiting in the manner he spent most waiting periods, maintaining his equipment, eating what was available, and thinking. He was thinking about what the Patriarch had said, the great cycle, the gathering of the star children into the whole. He had met many things in his life that believed in their own sacred purpose with the absolute conviction of the Patriarch's voice, and most of them had been wrong about the specific texture of what that purpose meant, what it asked of others, what it cost the things that were not part of the chosen cycle. He was also thinking about what the girl with the extra fingers had asked, "Are we people?" And he was thinking about the fact that he had said something that was honest and evasive in the same breath, which was a skill he had refined over a witcher's lifetime on the road, and that the evasion was evasive because the question was hard and he did not have a clean answer, and had known that since the moment he saw the congregation seated in their shared stillness on the chamber floor. Shani Alan brought him a meal on the third day, which was unexpected. Watercast administrators did not, in Geralt's developing understanding of Tau society, typically carry meals to consulting external assets. He said as much. "I am not delivering this in my capacity as Watercast administrator," she said, and set the tray down with the precise movements of someone who had been doing things precisely for 19 years and was now doing them by habit. "I have questions." "Ask them," he said. "When you went down the second time," she said, "when you sat with the Patriarch and told it about the fleet, you had information that could have been weaponized. You could have told it the fleet was a salvation, and it would have believed you and cooperated for reasons that were not based on truth." "Yes," Geralt said. "Why didn't you?" He picked up the food from the tray. It was Tau formula nutrient preparation, which had a taste he had categorized as acceptable. "Because I'm not in the business of weaponizing true things," he said. "And because whatever the Patriarch is, it spent 60 years building something, and it deserved to know what it was building toward. Even though knowing almost certainly made no difference to the outcome. It made a difference to the Patriarch," Geralt said. "Whether it made a difference to the outcome is a separate question." She was quiet for a moment. "Where do you think you came from?" she asked. "Really, before the hub." "A forest in a country called Velen," he said. "Before a passage I've walked 100 times went somewhere it had never gone before. And you think you can go back? I think I need to find someone with a deep enough understanding of how the universe is threaded to find the same seam," he said. Ossian said, "The Watercast would try. I'm taking him at his word." "He does not break his word," she said. "In 7 years, I have not seen him break his word." "Then I'll wait," Geralt said. She picked up the tray and walked toward the door, and stopped. "The girl you brought to the transport," she said. "I logged her boarding as clerical error, existing manifest rather than new entry. She and her mother are in the resettlement allocation." "I know," he said. "I checked." She looked at him for a moment with the assessing eye she used to look at everything. Then she went out. The Ethereal Oversight Commission sent 3 investigators to interview the congregation members individually. The commission investigators arrived with the formal bearing of officials performing a procedure they had prepared for, and with the subtler quality of people who had prepared for a procedure they had never actually expected to be performing, which showed in the way they looked at everything that was not their documentation tablets, a half-second too long. The Patriarch cooperated with full transparency. Geralt watched 2 of the interview sessions through the observation window of the cargo bay compartment. He watched the Patriarch answer every question with the same geological calm it had applied to everything since the first conversation in the chamber below. It described the seeding. It described the 60 years of cultivation. It described the theology of the Great Devourer, without editorial and without apology. When one of the commission investigators asked, carefully, why the Patriarch had agreed to surface the congregation rather than fighting, the Patriarch said, "Because the Witcher told me a true thing, and I have found true things to be more useful than comforting ones." The commission investigator wrote this down and moved on to the next question. Ossian's formal review concluded on the 5th day. The fleet admiral's finding was a commendation for operational outcome and a formal notation of the undisclosed condition element that would remain on the garrison commander's record as a command deviation. Ossian accepted both findings with the same composed precision he applied to everything. That evening he came to find Geralt in the commissioning compartment. He brought a communication tablet. "We have been in contact with the Inquisition," he said. Geralt looked at him. "The Inquisition's Ordo Xenos maintains the most comprehensive archive of crossover event data available in this part of the galaxy," Ossian said. "The phenomena you came through is not without precedent. There are records of spatial membrane events between realities, most of them poorly documented and even more poorly understood, but there are records. And there is an Inquisitor attached to the sector fleet. Her name is Inquisitor Liren Val of the Ordo Xenos, and she has reviewed the scan data from Hub Transit Level 7 and confirmed that the distortion event is consistent with documented membrane phenomena. She is willing to discuss what she knows about the mechanisms involved and whether they can be reproduced or located again." Geralt was quiet for a moment. "In my experience," he said, "Inquisitors want things." "In my experience as well," Ossian said. "Inquisitor Val wants testimony. A full account of what you are, where you come from, and what you know of the mechanisms that produced the membrane event. She describes this as a research interest. And if her research interest isn't satisfied, she is an Inquisitor," Ossian said. "I will not pretend that her interest is entirely without leverage." He paused. "I can tell you that in the 3 days of communication with her, she has been direct, has honored every stated condition of our information exchange, and has expressed genuine interest in the membrane data rather than in the Witcher as a political or military asset. That could change." "It could. I cannot guarantee the Inquisition." Ossian set the tablet down on the edge of the bunk frame. "What I can tell you is that she has information you need. Whether the exchange is worth the risk is your judgment." Geralt picked up the tablet and read the Inquisitor's communications. They were, as Ossian said, direct. They were also fluent in a way that surprised him. The questions Inquisitor Val asked in her preparatory messages suggested someone who had been thinking about reality as a layered structure for a long time and had developed genuine curiosity rather than institutional reflex about the spaces between layers. "When can she be reached?" Geralt said. "Now," Ossian said, "if you choose." Geralt set the tablet down. "Tell her I'm willing to meet," he said. Inquisitor Liren Val of the Ordo Xenos arrived at the transport ship by shuttle 2 hours after Ossian's message, which told Geralt she had been nearby enough to be available in 2 hours, which told him she had made herself available before receiving confirmation of the meeting, which told him she wanted this meeting more than she had stated. She was human. That surprised him irrationally, and he noted the irrationality even as he noted the surprise. He had spent a week alongside Tau and Genestealer cult members and one patriarch of a dead fleet's seeding program, and his calibration for what persons looked like on this world had drifted accordingly. She was human and middle-aged and carried herself with the erect economy of someone who had learned to move efficiently in environments where the threat was not always visible, and she wore a long coat over practical field dress, rather than the elaborate vestments he had seen depicted in the Tau's historical Ordo Xenos files. She sat across a table from him and put nothing on the table, which he read as a choice. "Witcher," she said. "Inquisitor," he said. "You came through a membrane event in a Tau transit hub." "Yes." "Do you know how?" "No," he said. "I've walked through passages before that I didn't fully understand. One of them delivered me here." "What kind of passages?" He told her about the way, the intersections of power that certain practitioners in his world knew how to use, the ancient paths that ran through and beneath the common world, and connected places that did not share geography. He was honest about how much he understood the mechanics. He was a witcher, not a mage. He could walk the paths. He could not explain why they existed. Val listened without interrupting, which meant she was absorbing rather than categorizing. He marked her as someone who was categorizing what she heard after the hearing rather than during it, which was a sign of a particular kind of intelligence. The membrane data from the transit hub, she said when he finished, shows characteristics consistent with warp-adjacent spatial folding, not true warp transit, something that shares some properties with Geller field-adjacent space, but is not chaotic in its signature. The Mechanicus consultants I had review it describe it as, and I quote, a pleasing theoretical anomaly. What does that mean in terms of replication? Unknown. Possibly it cannot be replicated intentionally, possibly it can. The data is insufficient. She looked at him steadily. What I can tell you is that the event produced a stable signature in the local space-time record that we can, with sufficient computational resources and time, track backward. Like tracing a wake to the ship that made it. How much time? I don't know. She paused. Weeks at minimum. Months more likely. Years if the signature degrades faster than modeling suggests. Geralt looked at the table between them. And in exchange for whatever you know about the mechanics, he said, you want testimony. I want documentation, she said. Yes, a full account of your origin, your biology as best you understand it, the passage mechanisms as best you understand them, and the events of the past 11 days in your own words. I want it as an Ordo Xenos research record, sealed, not for operational use. How much does sealed mean for the Inquisition? Less than the word suggests, and more than its critics would admit. She looked at him directly. I will not lie to you about what sealed means. What I can tell you is that my personal seal on a research record has protected the subjects of that record for 32 years. I am not sentimental about many things. I am careful about that. Geralt studied her. He had sat across tables from many people who wanted things and had learned the difference between want as transaction and want as genuine. Inquisitor Val wanted something genuine. That did not make her trustworthy in any complete sense. It made her a more interesting kind of risk. I'll give you the testimony, he said. I want access to the membrane data while you have the Mechanicus working on it. Not results, access. I want to know what they're finding while they're finding it. Agreed. And I want to be present at whatever process they use to trace the signature. Also agreed. And, he said, I want a straight answer to a question. She waited. The congregation, he said. The 300 people in the cargo bay. The Patriarch. What happens to them? Val was quiet for a moment. That is not within my authority to determine absolutely, she said. The Commission has jurisdiction over populations within Tau-administered space. The Ordo Xenos has oversight interest in the biological data. Neither body has established a precedent for this exact configuration. But you have an opinion. My opinion, she said, is that 300 individuals who demonstrated cooperation with an evacuation operation that saved 900,000 lives represent a data point that the Commission's existing frameworks were not built to process. And that data points which existing frameworks cannot process are, in my professional experience, best handled by the people closest to them rather than by frameworks. She looked at him. He looked at her. Ossian will fight for them, Geralt said. Garrison Commander Ossian has already filed a formal recommendation that the congregation be treated as a protected witness population pending full Commission review, Val said. He filed it 6 hours after the evacuation completed. Geralt was quiet. He made one decision on his own authority, he said. Yes, Val said, and then he documented everything else very carefully. That's how it goes, usually, Geralt said, once you're over the line, 3 months. That was how long the Mechanicus consultants took, and when they finished, what they produced was not a location but a direction, which the Chief Magos described in a briefing that lasted 4 hours and could, Geralt felt, have been accurately summarized in 4 minutes, as a detectable ripple in the local spatial membrane, indicating, with probabilistic confidence the Magos rated as moderate to high, the approximate vector from which the crossover event had originated. A vector was not a destination, but a vector was something. Val spent 2 weeks in conversation with the appropriate Mechanicus sect and an Adeptus Astra Telepathica specialist who dealt specifically in membrane phenomena at the edge of warp-adjacent space. And at the end of those 2 weeks she came to find Geralt in the research compartment he had been assigned aboard her vessel, the Litany of Considered Approach, where he had been spending the 3 months learning what he could about the framework this universe used to understand the spaces between things. She put a chart on the table. "It is not guaranteed," she said. "The Magos puts the confidence of the entry point at 68%. The probability of a reverse transit from that location producing a membrane event is unknown, because we have never deliberately induced a membrane event and do not know if it can be done. But we found the approximate origin. We found the approximate origin." Geralt looked at the chart. It showed a sector of space 2 months transit from their current position, a void region between 2 inhabited systems, unmarked on the standard navigation charts, as anything other than cleared space, with no significant celestial bodies. "Nothing is there," he said. "The event was not produced by something being there," Val said. "The event was produced by a resonance between 2 spatial layers. The resonance left a mark. The mark is there." He looked at the chart for a long time. "When can we go?" he said. "Whenever you decide," she said. "I have clearance to bring the Litany to that location and to conduct the membrane research on site. The Mechanicus team has agreed to accompany us." "And if it doesn't work," Geralt said, "if we go there and the resonance is gone, or the confidence is wrong, or whatever we try to induce doesn't produce an event, then we have ruled out one approach and we continue looking," Val said. "This is not, in my experience, an unusual outcome for research." "In your experience, I have spent 32 years researching things that existing frameworks cannot process," she said. "I have found what I was looking for, perhaps 40% of the time. I have found something more useful than what I was looking for, perhaps 30% of the time. The remaining 30% has produced dead ends, revised frameworks, and occasionally the uncomfortable discovery that the question itself was wrong." She looked at him. 68% is, historically, a good number for me." Geralt picked up the chart. He thought about a road in Velen and a forest passage he had walked 100 times, and the quality of amber light in a transit hub that was nothing like any place he had known. He thought about what he was going back to, and what he was leaving behind, and the distinction between the two that was always, on examination, less clear than it should have been. He thought about the girl with the extra fingers. She and her mother were in the resettlement compound on the Sept's main world, allocated housing and labor placement, status pending commission review. Ossian had submitted 3 supplementary reports on the congregation's behalf in 3 months. The commission had not yet responded. "When we go," he said, "what happens to the congregation while you're traveling with me?" "My personal seal on a research record," Val said, "covers all subjects documented in the record." He looked at her. "You put them in the record," he said. 3 weeks ago," she said. "Full biological and biographical documentation on all 311 individuals and the Patriarch. Sealed, as agreed. They didn't consent to be research subjects. They were given the option," she said. "The Patriarch agreed. Most of the congregation agreed. The remainder were included as anonymized case studies under the Patriarch's consent." She paused. "It is, as I indicated to you, less protection than the word suggests, and more than its critics would admit. What it does ensure is that inquisitorial interest in their welfare now attaches to my research record. That provides a level of institutional friction to adverse commission decisions that would not otherwise exist." Geralt was quiet for a long moment. "Inquisitors," he said, "want things." "Yes," Val said. "I wanted a research subject of unique cross-membrane origin. I wanted documentation of a genuine membrane event. I also, having spent 32 years researching what existing frameworks cannot process, wanted the 311 individuals in that cargo bay to have the most protection I could provide within my authority." She met his eyes. "I find that multiple wants can coexist without necessarily contradicting each other." "Witches," Geralt said, "learn to think the same way." He looked at the chart one more time. "Tell the Magos we leave in 3 days," he said. "I need to speak to the Patriarch before we go." The Patriarch received him in its compartment on the Sept's resettlement transport. It was seated in a chair that was not carved for it, but which it had adapted to with the patience of something that adapted to everything eventually. Its 6 violet eyes regarded the Witcher with the attention of a creature that took everything as data. "You found your direction," it said. "A vector," Geralt said. "Not a guarantee. Few things are." He stood in the compartment looking at the being that had spent 60 years building a civilization in the dark of an alien planet while waiting for a fleet that was going to consume everything it had made. He thought about what it had taken to walk those children out of the tunnels. "What will you do?" he said. "Wait," the patriarch said. "I am practiced at waiting." It looked at its 4 hands. "Though I think this waiting will be different. I have been told what I am waiting for is not the fleet this time." "Commission review," Geralt said. "Yes, a different kind of judgment." It looked at him. "Your Inquisitor is unusual." "I think so too," he said. He held out his hand. It was a human gesture, and the patriarch was not human, but the patriarch looked at the extended hand for a moment, and then extended one of its own lower hands, which was larger than a human hand and shaped slightly differently at the joints. And the Witcher and the patriarch shook hands in the resettlement compartment of a Tau transport ship, while outside the observation port, the stars of a universe far from Velen burned with the cold and ancient fire that had been burning before either of them existed, and would burn long after both of them were gone. "Be well," Geralt said. "Hunt cleanly," the patriarch said. He left. He did not look back. He never looked back at places he was leaving. He had learned a long time ago that the road forward was as much as he could hold. Somewhere in the void beyond the amber threshold's ash field, where Vashra Kel had been, and a dead planet's shadow still bent the light of nearby stars, a tendril of Hive Fleet Leviathos turned from its completed harvest and moved on, carrying with it the biological memory of everything the amber threshold had ever been, including the improbable chemical trace of a being that registered in the fleet's vast and mindless aggregate as something old and foreign and unsuitable for the standard classification. The Great Devourer catalogued everything. It catalogued the trace, found no corresponding entry in 60 million years of data, and moved on. On the litany of considered approach, the Witcher sharpened his swords in the methodical silence of a professional who kept his tools in order because the next job was always coming. 2 months to the membrane site, 68% probability. An Inquisitor at the end of the corridor, whose want coexisted with her care in a ratio he had not yet finished calculating. A patriarch waiting on a resettlement transport with the patience of something that had already waited 60 years and could wait more. 311 people with extra fingers and extra eyes and a faith that their God was coming. And a galaxy continuing its ancient and grinding work around all of them, dark beyond reckoning, indifferent beyond any prayer's reach, grinding on through its 10,000 years of war, its suns burning and guttering, and the Imperium enduring, and the things in the warp between the stars, dreaming of hunger and blood and change and decay, dreaming without sleeping, wanting without rest. The Witcher had walked between worlds before. The passage always took longer than expected, and cost more than the contract specified, and ended somewhere different than the map suggested. He had learned to walk it anyway. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. But somewhere in the void between a dead world and an uncertain destination, on a vessel called the Litany of Considered Approach, a man with a silver sword and golden eyes was moving through it toward the next road. He had never stopped.